The world outside my window was a blur of churning white, a blizzard so thick it swallowed the whole landscape. The wind howled a mournful song against the metal walls of Burkner Station, a sound that after a decade of polar research I had come to accept as a constant, unforgiving companion. But tonight, that howl was punctuated by a new, more immediate kind of noise. The nervous chatter of 5 fresh recruits, barely out of their training modules, huddled around me in the common room. My name is Michael Ford. I'm a veteran logistics coordinator and winter over specialist. My job is to train new teams and ensure they survive the 4-month stretch of perpetual darkness and soul-crushing isolation that makes up our winter season. Most of the time, that's just a matter of following procedure and keeping morale from tanking. But here at Burkner, there's a different set of rules. Rules that are carved not into a safety manual, but into the memories of the men and women who didn't make it back. All right, settle down, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the station's ventilation system. My hands, calloused from years of working in the cold, rested on the table, a silent testament to my experience. You've all seen the orientation video. You know the drill. This is not a vacation. This is not a research trip. This is a fortress against the end of the world. The tall guy with the skeptical eyebrows, a recruit named Liam, let out a short, cynical laugh. The end of the world, sir? It's a meteorological station, not a zombie apocalypse. His comment earned a few nervous chuckles from the others, but my expression remained unchanged. I met his gaze, my eyes holding a weight that had nothing to do with cynicism. You're right, Liam. It's not a zombie apocalypse. It's worse. Because the zombies you can at least see coming. Out here, the thing that gets you, it knows your name. The chuckles died instantly. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the incessant wind outside. The recruits, who had arrived just hours earlier on the last supply flight of the season, looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion. The redhead, a young woman named Maya, spoke up, her voice a little shaky. What are you talking about, Michael? Is this a hazing ritual? I wish it was, I said, a flicker of something ancient and tired in my eyes. I walked over to a whiteboard and picked up a marker. The first rule, and the most important, is this. Do not, under any circumstances, go outside after sundown. I wrote the words in bold, stark letters. This station is our bubble, our sanctuary. The moment you step outside that airlock after the sun has set, you're not coming back. And believe me, the sun has already set for the next 4 months. A recruit named Derek, a stocky, muscular man who looked like he'd been a Marine, cleared his throat. We're trained for cold weather survival. We have protocols. What's the difference between going out at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m.? It's the same temperature. The difference, I said, turning to face him, is what's out there. The ice is not just ice. The cold is not just cold. There is something else, and it's waiting for you. It's not waiting for the sun to rise. It's waiting for the human mind to be at its weakest. It's a parasite that feeds on fear and loneliness. I wrote the second rule on the board. If you hear voices calling your name from outside, ignore them. Do not answer. Do not go to the window. Maya's eyes widened. Voices? What kind of voices? Your mother's voice, your father's, your best friend, your wife. It knows who you care about. It knows what you miss. It will use those voices to lure you out. But it's not them. It's a lie woven from the deep cold, a whisper from the abyss. You will be tempted, you will be pulled, but you will not go. Another rule appeared on the board. Do not leave any of the station's external windows uncovered, especially at night. This rule seemed to make the most sense, but the way I explained it was far from comforting. The windows are not for us to look out of. They are for it to look in. It will press its face against the glass. It will look like someone you know, someone you love. You might see a familiar smile, a wave, a plea for help, but it's a trap, a visual lie. If you see something at the window, do not look away. Do not stare back. Instead, go to a different room, find a crewmate, and wait for it to pass. I turned to look at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering on Maya. There was something about her that reminded me of a past recruit, a past mistake. These rules aren't suggestions, I said, my voice dropping to a low, serious tone. They are the difference between life and death. The ones who didn't believe me are the ones we never hear from again. And no, we don't send out search parties. We can't. They're already gone. Later that night, the station was eerily quiet. The recruits had dispersed, and I was in my quarters reviewing the station's log. I came across an entry from 2 years ago, a name I hadn't thought of in a long time. Ethan, the older brother of Maya. The entry was brief, just a note about an unexplained equipment malfunction and his subsequent disappearance. A shiver ran down my spine. The story of what happened to Ethan was an unspoken one, a ghost story passed down through the polar research community. It was about how he had heard a voice calling his name from outside, a voice that sounded exactly like his mother, and how he had walked out into the endless dark, never to be seen again. I had forgotten that Maya was related to him. I closed the logbook, the cold seeping into my bones. The wind outside seemed to be whispering a name now, but it wasn't mine. It was Maya's. A soft, gentle whisper that promised to lead her to her brother. The station's ancient, creaking metal groaned under the pressure of the wind. I could almost hear the whispers slithering through the vents, coiling around the walls. I heard a sudden noise from the common room, a chair scraping against the floor. I grabbed my coat and rushed out. I found Maya standing by the window, her hand on the blinds, a look of trance-like confusion on her face. Her eyes were fixed on the blackness outside. "Maya, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. "Get away from the window." She didn't respond. She just kept staring, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and longing. I thought I saw something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "A light. It looked like a flare." I knew the drill. The entity was already working on her. I had to snap her out of it. "Maya," I said, my voice sharper this time, "there are no flares out there. There is only ice, and the thing that wants you to join it." She flinched, as if my words had physically struck her. No, it was a light. My brother, Ethan. He had an emergency kit with him. He could be signaling. "He's not," I said, the words a cold, harsh truth. "He's gone. What you're seeing isn't him. It's a trick." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand. I saw his face for a second. It was him. He was smiling." My heart sank. The entity wasn't just using voices. It was using images. It had learned. "Maya, listen to me," I said, walking towards her slowly, my hands outstretched. "We need to get you away from here. Now." But it was too late. The light she had seen was a trap. It had been drawing her in, slowly, inexorably. As I got closer, I saw it too. A pale, spectral face pressed against the window pane. A perfect, smiling copy of a man I had known. A perfect copy of Ethan. But it wasn't a flare, but a manifestation of pure, malicious imitation. "He's here," Maya whispered, a flicker of insane hope in her eyes. "He came back for me." Her hand moved to the handle of the airlock, a reflex born of hope and desperation. The entity was almost complete with its work. It had her. "No," I shouted, a raw, primal cry of frustration and fear. "Don't open that door." I lunged forward, but I was too late. Her hand was on the latch. Her face was a mask of desperate love and longing. I saw the airlock light turn from red to green, the hiss of the pressurized door beginning to open. The cold, unforgiving air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of death and the whisper of a lie. The airlock hissed open with a sound like a starving beast drawing a breath. A blast of frigid, snow-laden wind ripped through the common room, carrying with it a cold that felt alive, malevolent. It wasn't just the temperature. It was a cold that seemed to sink into your bones and whisper promises of oblivion. I lunged for Maya, my hand grabbing the back of her parka, but she was already half-stepped into the blinding white maelstrom. She turned her head, her face a heartbreaking mix of hope and desperation. "He's out there, Michael," she screamed, her voice snatched away by the wind. My hand slipped on the slick fabric of her coat. My fingers grasped at air as her weight pulled her forward, the vortex of the blizzard swallowing her whole. The door slammed shut with a sickening thud, a final, unyielding seal. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the wind. It was the silence of a tomb. I stood there, gasping, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I had been too late, just like with so many others. The station's emergency lights flashed, a stark red glow pulsing against the white walls. I was alone with a cold, unforgiving reality. and the knowledge that the thing outside had just claimed its first victim of the season. I looked at the window where I had seen Ethan's face, the glass now a sheet of frosted white, and I knew what had happened. It wasn't just an illusion. It was a projection, a lure. It was a predator, and it had learned from its past mistakes. It had evolved. It was no longer content to just call. It was now capable of creating visual lies, perfect replicas designed to exploit the very real, very human need for connection. The silence after Maya's disappearance was unbearable. The air in the station seemed heavier, charged with a quiet hostility. I could feel their eyes on me. Liam's narrowed suspicion, Derek's clenched fists, Jenna's haunted stare. They didn't say it out loud, not at first. But I knew the question hanging between us. Had I let her go? That night, I pretended to sleep in my quarters, though my body was wired with exhaustion and fear. Through the thin walls, I could hear them whispering in the common room. He didn't even try to save her, Liam hissed. Pulled her back. He wanted her gone, Liam snapped. Maybe he's working with it. I gripped the sheets so hard my knuckles ached. They thought I was compromised. The truth was worse. I wasn't sure I wasn't. At some point in the night, I jolted awake, throat raw. My own voice was echoing in the room, low, broken whispers tumbling from my lips. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew I was answering someone. When I sat up, the whispers stopped. The next morning, Jenna wouldn't meet my eyes. Liam looked pale and angry, like a man about to accuse me of murder. Derek kept a hand on his knife the entire time we ate, and maybe they were right. Because when I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom mirror for a split second, my reflection didn't move with me. Its lips moved first, whispering my name. I stumbled back to my quarters, the weight of my failure a physical burden. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey, the liquid fire a small comfort against the deep chill that had settled inside me. The rules I had written on the whiteboard felt like a grim joke. What good were rules when the enemy was everywhere? A phantom that could walk through walls and into your mind. The next morning, the other recruits were waiting for me in the common room, their faces etched with a combination of fear and accusation. They had seen the airlock lights flash, and they knew. "Where is she?" Derek, the ex-Marine, demanded, his voice low and threatening. "What did you do with Maya?" I looked at their faces, faces that were still unmarred by the slow decay of fear and paranoia. They didn't understand yet. They couldn't. I sighed, the air in my lungs feeling heavy and stale. "She's gone," I said, the words a cold, flat statement. "The same way the others are gone. She went outside." "That's impossible," Liam cried out, his skeptical eyebrows now twisted into a knot of genuine terror. "We were all here. The door was locked." "It wasn't," I countered, my voice weary. "The entity, it can manipulate the station's systems. It can make you see things, hear things. It can make you believe that a door is locked when it's not. It preys on hope. It gives you a reason to go out there. And she went for it. She thought she saw her brother." "Her brother?" Maya's roommate, a quiet woman named Jenna, asked, her voice a fragile whisper. I explained the story of Ethan, the one that the station's old logbooks carried like a stain. I told them about how he had been lured out by a false voice and how Maya had been lured by a false face. I watched the terror grow in their eyes, the fragile wall of their skepticism crumbling to dust. "So we're just trapped here?" Derek asked, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. With that thing outside? And it can come in whenever it wants." "No," I said, a spark of resolve igniting within me. "We're not trapped. We're a fortress. But we need to be smart. We need to be a team. We need to follow the rules without question. And we need to find out what it is and how to stop it." That was the turning point. The horror, once an external threat, had now been internalized. It was in the air, in the shadows, in the silence. It had taken one of them, and the others were now living in a state of perpetual, anxious dread. I established a new routine. We'd stay in pairs, never venturing alone. We'd check on each other, a constant state of vigilance, the only defense against the mind-bending influence of the entity. I assigned each of them a task, a way to keep them busy and their minds from spiraling into the abyss of paranoia. Liam, the former skeptic, became the keeper of the station's logbooks, meticulously documenting every strange sound, every flickering light. Derek, the muscle, was put on watch duty, patrolling the corridors and ensuring all the window blinds were securely fastened. Jenna, the quiet one, was tasked with monitoring the station's power systems, a role that required an unblinking focus that would, hopefully, keep her thoughts from straying. But the entity was persistent. It began to exploit the cracks in our defenses. The station was a fortress, but it had begun to betray us. One morning, while checking the western corridor, I noticed a thin sheet of frost on the inside wall. That was impossible. Insulation was thick enough to keep interior temperatures stable. Yet the ice clung to the vents like veins. By afternoon, the frost had thickened into branching shapes, spirals, crude faces, jagged symbols that almost looked like writing. Derek scraped at one patch with his knife, chipping loose a shard. "It's just condensation," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The moment the shard snapped off, a sound leaked out of it. A faint, hollow echo, like someone whispering through a pipe. The noise spread across the corridor, bouncing from vent to vent until it sounded like dozens of voices murmuring at once. Liam clapped his hands over his ears and shouted, "Make it stop!" The whispers faded as quickly as they came, leaving only the brittle silence of the corridor. I stared at the frost pattern. In the jagged streaks, I swore I could see human fingerprints, pressed from the inside out. I forced everyone back to the common room. "From now on," I said, my voice hoarse, "we don't touch the frost. We don't even look at it. Do you hear me?" But the damage was done. Every wall, every vent, every pane of frost glass became a potential doorway. It wasn't outside anymore. It was already here, inside the station, growing like mold. One night, the station's emergency sirens began to wail, a dissonant, jarring shriek that tore through the silence. I rushed to the main control panel, my heart pounding. The screen was a chaotic mess of red and orange warnings, a critical power failure in the generator room. I looked at Jenna, who was already there, her face pale. "What happened?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, her voice a little too high. "I was just monitoring the levels, and it just went haywire. It's telling me the generator is about to blow." I rushed to the generator room, Derek and Liam at my heels. We burst into the room, and I saw the problem immediately. A single cable, a redundant safety line, had been unplugged. A simple, innocuous act. One that would never cause a meltdown, but one that the entity had manipulated the computer to perceive as a critical failure. "It's a lie," I said, my voice low and tense. "It's a phantom warning. There's nothing wrong with the generator. It just wanted to get us down here." We were a group of 4 men in a small enclosed room, far from the rest of the station. We were isolated, and the entity knew it. "Look!" Derek pointed to a small, porthole-sized window in the generator room door. A face was pressed against the glass. A perfect, ghostly replica of Jenna's face, her eyes wide with terror, her lips mouthing a silent plea. "Don't look at it," I commanded, my hand clamping down on Liam's shoulder. "It's not her." But Jenna, who was standing closest to the door, couldn't resist. She stared at the image of herself, a look of profound confusion on her face. The image on the glass changed. It twisted and contorted. The face of Jenna morphing into a grotesque, inhuman parody of a scream. Her eyes, once filled with terror, now held a cold, predatory hunger. The sound of the station's lights flickering on and off echoed in the silence. The entity was toying with us. Jenna whimpered, taking a step back. I don't understand." "It's trying to confuse you," I said, my voice low and urgent. "It's trying to make you doubt yourself. Just look at me. Focus on my voice. We're going to get out of here, right now." But as I said the words, the lights went out completely. The generator room was plunged into a black, suffocating darkness. I could hear the sound of the wind outside, a low, guttural growl that was getting closer, more personal. "Michael?" Liam's voice was a terrified whisper in the darkness. "What was that?" I could see nothing. The only thing I could feel was the icy cold and a growing sense of dread. The entity was here. It was inside the station, and it was no longer just toying with us. It was playing for keeps. A hand brushed against my arm in the dark, and I recoiled, my heart jumping into my throat. "Don't touch me," I screamed, a raw, panicked sound that I hadn't heard from myself in years. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It was Derek. "It's just me, Michael. he said, his voice a shaky but steady rock in the storm. "We need to get back to the main common area. We're too exposed here." I nodded, the word a small, reassuring sound. The power flickered back on. We were safe, for now. But the entity had made its point. It had a way in. It had found the flaws in our fortress, and it was just getting started. As we walked back to the common room, the echoes of our fear still hanging in the air, I saw something on the wall of the corridor. Scratched into the metal with a furious, jagged hand were two words, "Get out!" I looked at my hand. My nails were caked with dirt. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the entity had made me do it. It had used me to scratch that warning, a twisted taunt, a reminder that it wasn't just outside. It was a part of us. It was the whisper in our minds. It was the face in the window. And it was going to be the end of us all. I looked at the others, their faces grim, their eyes searching the shadows. We were no longer a team. We were four desperate men, trapped in a steel box, with something ancient and malevolent closing in. The air in the common room was thick with unspoken fear, a palpable weight that pressed down on us. The words I had scrawled on the whiteboard, the very rules I had insisted were our salvation, now felt like a cruel joke. The entity had breached our sanctuary. It was no longer a phantom at the window. It was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the static, a parasite that had burrowed deep into our minds. "We need to go over the rules again," I said, my voice hoarse. "From the top. Every single one." We huddled around the whiteboard, the four of us, a grim, exhausted huddle. Liam, with his newfound reverence for the station's old logbooks, Derek, his confident demeanor shattered, and Jenna, whose eyes darted around the room as if expecting to see a spectral reflection of herself in every shiny surface. "Rule 1. Do not go outside after sundown," I read, pointing at the stark letters. "The entity can't survive in direct sunlight. The UV radiation, it's like a poison to it. That's why it only hunts in the perpetual dark of the winter." "Then why did it try to lure us outside?" Derek asked, his voice low and guttural. "Why did it make us believe the generator was going to blow up?" "Because it doesn't need to physically kill us," I replied, the truth a bitter taste in my mouth. "It feeds on fear, on paranoia. It wants us to lose our minds. It wants us to turn on each other. It wants us to become its puppets." The get out message, it was a warning from the part of my mind that's still my own, a desperate cry against its influence. It's trying to get me to abandon my post, to run. It's trying to make me a murderer. A tense silence fell over the room. The full, terrifying scope of the entity's power was beginning to sink in. This wasn't a monster you could shoot. It was a poison that ate away at the very core of your humanity. The next few days were a blur of sleeplessness and paranoia. We moved like ghosts through the station, our every step an exercise in hypervigilance. The flickering lights, the sudden drops in temperature, the faint, disembodied whispers, they were all tools in the entity's arsenal. It was playing a game with us, a horrifying game of cat and mouse, where the line between sanity and madness was razor-thin. One afternoon, I was in the mess hall, trying to force down a ration pack, when the lights began to flicker. I looked up to see Liam, his eyes wide, his body rigid with fear. "Michael," he whispered, "do you see it?" I looked at the wall where he was staring. There was nothing, just the beige, sterile wall of the mess hall. But I knew what he was seeing. I knew the entity was showing him something, a perfect, personalized lie. "Liam, look at me," I commanded, my voice sharp. "Don't look at it." He didn't listen. His eyes were fixed on the wall, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face. It's my dad," he said, his voice a soft, childlike whisper. "He's telling me to come home. He says he's sorry. He says he loves me." I jumped up and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. "It's not him, Liam. It's a lie." "It's the entity." He flinched, his eyes snapping back to me, but the smile was still there, a ghost of a smile, a sign that the entity's hooks were already in deep. "He says he's not alone," Liam continued, his voice still that chilling whisper. "He says the others are here too. They're all here. They're waiting for us to join them." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The entity was no longer content with just one victim. It was now trying to lure all of us out. Suddenly, a loud, jarring sound ripped through the station. It was the sound of the emergency lockdown siren. Red lights flashed, and the automated voice of the station's computer system echoed through the speakers. Warning. All external airlocks are now sealed. All internal doors are now locked. This is a containment protocol. Do not attempt to override. I looked at the emergency panel. The entity had locked us in. It had cut off our retreat. It was trapping us inside our own fortress, turning our sanctuary into a cage. Derek ran over to the main terminal, his hands shaking as he tried to override the lockdown. "It's not working," he yelled, his voice thick with panic. "The system's locked. We can't get out." I knew what the entity was doing. It was forcing us into close quarters, amplifying our fear, and giving it more opportunities to manipulate us. It was playing a long game, a game of attrition. It was trying to get us to turn on each other, to see each other as a threat. "We need to stay calm," I said, my voice betraying none of the terror that was coiling in my gut. "This is what it wants. It wants us to panic. We need to think. We need to find a way to get the station's systems back." Jenna, who had been standing in a corner, watching the unfolding chaos with a detached, almost serene expression, suddenly walked over to the main terminal. She pulled out a small metallic card from her pocket. "It's a bypass key," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "I stole it from the station director's office before he left." I looked at the key, then at her. A sense of unease settled over me. Her calmness was unnatural. It was too composed, too perfect. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment. She inserted the key into the terminal. The screen flashed and a new message appeared. "Containment protocol override successful. All locks and doors are now open." "See?" Jenna said, turning to me, a small, unsettling smile on her face. "Now we can go outside. We can go find them, my brother and Maya. They're all waiting for us." I knew then that the entity had gotten to her. It hadn't used fear or paranoia. It had used hope. It had convinced her that the only way to save the others was to join them. "Jenna, no," I yelled, my heart hammering in my chest. "Give me that key. That's not a real override. It's a trap." But it was too late. She had already pulled the key out and was walking towards the main airlock, her movements eerily fluid and graceful. "They're so cold, Michael," she said, her voice a whispered plea. "We need to go out and help them. They're waiting." I grabbed her arm, but she was stronger than she looked. She pushed me away with a single, brutal shove. The force of it sent me stumbling back, crashing into the wall. As I struggled to regain my footing, I saw her reach the airlock, her hand on the handle. "Don't do it, Jenna," Derek yelled, his voice a frantic bellow. "He's lying. It's the thing." But she didn't listen. She didn't even turn around. The door to the airlock hissed open, and the blinding white of the storm rushed in. Jenna stepped into the maelstrom, and in the swirling snow, I saw it again. The pale, spectral faces of Maya and Ethan, their smiles wide and unnervingly perfect, beckoning her to join them. The door slammed shut, and the silence returned, a silence heavier and more final than the last time. The entity had claimed its second victim. It was winning, and we were running out of time. I looked at Liam and Derek, their faces pale and gaunt. We were now a team of 3, and I had a feeling the entity was just getting started. It had turned our sanctuary into a prison, our rules into a punchline, and our hope into a weapon. And out in the endless white, the whispers were getting louder. The silence was a character in the room now, a living, breathing thing. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the quiet of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After Jenna's disappearance, the station became a tomb of our own making. We moved like phantoms, our eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, every fleeting flicker of light. We were no longer a crew. We were 3 desperate men, trapped in a steel box. It was the face of the entity. "It's trying to cut us off," I said, my voice low. "It wants us to feel alone. It wants to sever our last connection to the outside world." "What are we going to do?" Liam asked, his voice shaking. He was standing a few feet away, clutching a logbook to his chest, like a lifeline. "We can't fight it. We can't even see it. It's just everywhere." "We fight back with what we have," I said, a flicker of resolve igniting within me. "Our minds, our memories. It wants to erase them, so we'll use them. We'll remember who we are, where we came from, and why we're fighting." I led them to the research lab, the one place in the station that was still functioning independently of the main computer. It was filled with old equipment, a dusty, forgotten corner of the station. We're going to use this, I said, gesturing to an old, decommissioned shortwave radio transmitter. We're going to send a message, not a distress signal, but a message to ourselves, a message to the part of our minds that's still our own. The idea was audacious, perhaps insane. We would use the radio to broadcast our memories, our names, our stories. We would create a static-filled broadcast of our own, a counter-narrative to the entity's lie. We'd flood the station with our own humanity, with our own memories, a sound that it couldn't replicate, couldn't corrupt. We worked for hours, hunched over the rusty old radio. We replaced old parts, cleaned wires, and ran a power line from a backup generator. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. Every sudden noise, every flicker of the lights made our hearts jump into our throats. The entity was watching us. It was waiting for us to make a mistake. Finally, we were ready. I pressed the transmission button, and a low hum filled the room. A wave of static, a pure white noise washed over us. It was the sound of the entity, the sound of the void. I spoke first, my voice a raw, unadorned sound in the emptiness. My name is Michael Ford. I am a logistics coordinator. I have been at Burkner Station for 10 years. My purpose is to train new recruits. I am fighting for my life. I am not alone. I looked at Liam. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but he nodded. He knew what he had to do. He leaned into the microphone. My name is Liam Davis. I'm a rookie climatologist. I am from Omaha, Nebraska. I am here to study the Antarctic weather patterns. My best friend's name is Aaron. I have a dog named Charlie. I am not alone. He spoke the words like a prayer, a desperate incantation against the encroaching darkness. Derek went next, his voice a low, steady rumble. My name is Derek Johnson. I am a former Marine. My purpose is to defend this station. I am from Texas. I have a sister. Her name is Emily. We went fishing in the Gulf of Mexico when we were kids. I am not alone. We continued for hours, our voices a chorus of defiance in the face of oblivion. We spoke of our families, our hopes, our fears, our memories. We broadcast our humanity into the very heart of the entity's domain. We were fighting a war of words, a battle for our very souls. The night after we broadcast our voices into the static, I wandered the corridor alone. Sleep was impossible. The station silence pressed on me like a weight. At first, I thought the corridor lights were flickering again. But no, the shadows were wrong. They stretched too far, bending in directions light couldn't reach. I walked past the operations door and froze. The wall was moving. The metal bulkhead pulsed, slow and steady, as though the entire station were breathing. And underneath the pulse was a sound, soft, familiar, a lullaby. My wife's voice, sweet and fragile, singing the song she used to hum when we put our son to sleep. I wanted to run. Instead, my legs carried me closer until I was standing before a darkened window. That's when I saw myself. My reflection stood in the glass, but it was smiling. Its lips moved in time with the lullaby. My reflection lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass. I staggered back, shaking, whispering aloud just to hear something real. That's not me. The reflection mouthed the words back, but it didn't match. It moved too fast, too eager. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Because I knew the thing had found a way to wear my face. And then something happened. The static on the radio changed. It wasn't the white, empty noise anymore. It was filled with whispers, with screams, with distorted fragments of our own voices. The entity was fighting back. Michael, a voice whispered from the radio. It was my own voice, but it was hollow, empty. Why are you doing this? We can give you peace. We can make you forget the pain. We can make you whole. It's a lie, I shouted, turning off the radio. It's trying to tempt us. It's trying to break our will. But it was too late. The whispers were already in our minds. The radio was now broadcasting directly into our brains, a maddening, distorted chorus of our own memories and fears. I looked at he was gone. Suddenly, Derek grabbed me by the arm, his eyes wide with fear. We have to run, Michael. We have to get out of here. I looked at him, and I saw a flicker of the old bravado in his eyes. He was fighting it. He was remembering. No, I said, my voice a shaky but determined sound. We can't run. We have to finish this. We have to destroy it. I looked at the radio. It was the source of the entity's new power. It was the conduit. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed an axe from the wall, a tool of last resort that we had kept for emergencies. What are you doing? Derek yelled, his voice thick with fear. We need to get out of here. I'm going to cut off its voice, I said, my voice a low, determined rumble. I'm going to sever its connection to us. I raised the axe, the metal cold and heavy in my hands. The whispers in my mind were now a cacophony, 1,000 voices all speaking at once, all of them it connected with the radio, the sound of shattering glass and twisted metal echoing in the small room. The whispers in my mind stopped. The static on the monitor flickered and then went black. The station was plunged into a deep, heavy silence. I looked at Liam. He was still standing there, his eyes wide and blank, a small trickle of blood running from his ear. He was gone. The entity had won. It had taken his mind. I looked at Derek. He was staring at the floor, his face pale, his body trembling. I knew what he was thinking. We were the last two. We were alone. And the thing that had taken our friends was now confined to the darkness, waiting. We were safe, but we were also alone. We were the last two men in a steel box. The static on the monitors was gone. The station was just a steel box in the middle of a frozen wasteland. A lonely vessel with two men and a ghost. Derek and I moved through the station like a pair of terrified animals, our senses on high alert. We ate in silence, our meals nothing more than a mechanical act of survival. We slept in shifts, one of us always on watch, a loaded flare gun resting on the nightstand. The flare gun wasn't for the entity, it was for us. It was a promise that if one of us started to hear the whispers, to see the faces, the other would end it quickly. The entity wasn't gone. It was just changing its tactics. It had been a voice, a face, a whisper in the machine. Now, it was a presence, a feeling of being watched, of being hunted. One night, I was on watch, sitting in the main common room, staring at the empty chairs, the chairs where Liam, Jenna, and Maya had sat just a few days ago, the chairs where they had laughed, where they had listened to my warnings, where they had signed their death warrants. A deep, soul-crushing despair settled over me. We were all going to die here. The entity would get us. It was just a matter of time. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I jumped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I turned, my hand instinctively reaching for the flare gun. It was Derek. I can't sleep, he whispered, his eyes wide with a familiar bone-deep fear. I keep seeing her face. My sister Emily. She's standing at the window. She's waving at me. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The entity was now bypassing the systems, the wires, the radios. It was broadcasting its lies directly into our minds, feeding on our loneliness, our guilt, our fear. It's not her, I said, my voice low and urgent. It's a lie, Derek. It's a trick. But it's so real, Michael, he said, his voice a fragile whisper. She's smiling at me. She's telling me that everything's going to be okay. She's telling me to come outside and see her. I grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at me. Listen to me, I said, my voice sharp and demanding. That's not her. That's a trap. She's gone, Derek. She's gone. He flinched, and a flicker of sanity returned to his eyes. You're right, he said, his voice trembling. I know you're right, but I just want to see her one more time. The entity had found its new way in. It was a parasite that fed on grief. It was using our own love against us, turning our most cherished memories into a tool of destruction. I knew we had to do something drastic. We couldn't fight it with logic. We couldn't fight it with rules. We had to fight it with a weapon it couldn't understand. Fire. I led Derek to the old furnace room, a place of heat and noise, a place where the cold of the entity couldn't take hold. The room was a maze of pipes and old machinery, and in the center of it all was the station's main furnace, a monstrous, churning beast of metal and fire. We're going to use this, I said, gesturing to the furnace. We're going to burn everything, the logbooks, the research notes, the photo albums, everything that holds a memory. We sat by the furnace fire, throwing pieces of our past into the flames. Derek pulled a crumpled photo from his pocket and stared at it for a long time. His jaw worked, but no words came at first. Then, finally, he spoke. Africa, he muttered. We lost 6 men in an ambush. I was the only one who made it back. His voice cracked, low and ragged. I carried their tags home, all 6. And every night since, I've wondered why it wasn't me left in the dirt. The flames reflected in his eyes. When I saw Jenna by that airlock, I thought, maybe it's my turn. Maybe I was meant to be out there with them. I opened my mouth to speak, but he shook his head violently. But here's the thing, Derek whispered. The memory's wrong. I remember one of them screaming my name for like, I hear it when I close my eyes. But lately, It doesn't sound like him anymore. It sounds like her, Jenna, sometimes Maya, sometimes even my sister. His knuckles went white around the photo. It's rewriting my memories, Michael. I don't know what's mine anymore. When he finally threw the photo into the furnace, his hand trembled like he was cutting out a piece of his soul. Derek looked at me like I had lost my mind. But why? That's all we have left. Our memories, our past. That's exactly what it wants, I said, my voice low and urgent. It's using our memories against us. It's using them to create its lies. We need to sever that connection. We need to cut off its food supply. I took a picture of my wife and son from my wallet, a memory I cherished more than anything in the world. I looked at their smiling faces, and a part of me, a small, selfish part, wanted to keep it, but I knew what I had to do. I threw the picture into the churning flames of the furnace. The paper curled, blackened, and then burst into a fiery nothingness. Derek watched me, his face a mask of horror. I looked at him, and I knew what he was thinking. I was a monster. I was a man who had willingly destroyed his own past. It's the only way, Derek, I said, my voice raw with a pain that went deeper than any physical wound. We have to let go of the past. We have to make ourselves empty. It can't feed on what isn't there. He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, he pulled a small, worn photograph from his pocket. It was a picture of him and his sister, Emily, fishing. He held it for a moment, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of love and loss. Then he threw it into the flames. We spent the next few hours in a grim, silent ritual. We gathered everything we could find that held a memory. Old letters, journals, even a small stuffed animal that belonged to one of the recruits. We threw it all into the fire, a self-immolation of our own humanity. With every item that burned, I felt a part of myself die. But with every death, I also felt a strange kind of freedom. I was becoming an empty vessel, a man without a past, a man who couldn't be controlled. The entity fought back. The whispers returned, a maddening chorus of protest. The faces of our loved ones appeared in the flames, their eyes wide with betrayal, their mouths screaming our names. But we just kept throwing our memories into the fire, our faces grim, our resolve unbroken. Finally, the fire died down. The furnace room was quiet, filled only with the smell of ash and ozone. We were alone. We were empty. And the entity was silent. I looked at Derek. His face was a blank slate, his eyes empty. He had become what I had told him to become, a man without a past. He had won. But he had also lost a part of himself that he could never get back. I had no choice. I had to continue the story. I had to conclude it. I had to face the monster in the ice. I had to face the silence. I had to find a way to make it end. The silence that followed was a death knell. We had won the battle, but we had lost the war. We were two hollow men in an empty fortress, our pasts reduced to ash, our memories nothing more than a faint, unreadable scar. The entity was gone, but so were we. We were just two bodies, two husks, walking through the sterile corridors of Burkner Station. I looked at Derek. His face was a blank slate, his eyes devoid of emotion. He was what I had told him to become, a man without a past. He had done it. He had sacrificed his memories, his grief, his humanity to win the fight. But in winning, he had become a ghost. I looked at my own hands. They were trembling, not from cold, but from a profound emptiness. My wife, my son, my life before this place, it was all gone. A self-inflicted lobotomy, a price I had willingly paid to survive. We were alone. We were empty. And the entity was silent. Or so we thought. I was in my quarters, trying to read a technical manual I no longer understood, when I heard a sound from the main common room. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a scream. It was a soft, guttural hum, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of a machine, a terrible, ancient machine, and it was getting closer. I grabbed the flare gun and rushed out. I found Derek standing in the middle of the common room, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. He was humming, a low, rhythmic sound that was the same as the one I had heard. He was a part of the machine. "Derek!" I yelled, my voice a desperate, frantic sound in the silence. "What are you doing? Stop it!" He didn't respond. He just kept humming, a perfect, inhuman rhythm. His body began to convulse, his muscles twitching and jerking. I saw a red glow beginning to emanate from his eyes, a flicker of light that pulsed in time with the hum. The entity wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a phantom. It was a program, a virus, A parasite that had used our minds as a host, our memories as a power source, and our grief as a weapon. And now it was reprogramming us. It was turning us into something else. I knew what I had to do. I had to end it. I had to sever the connection once and for all. I raised the flare gun, my hands trembling. It was the last memory I had to sacrifice. The memory of my friendship with Derek. The memory of the man who had fought beside me, who had faced the darkness with me. I had to kill him. I had to put him out of his misery. I aimed the flare gun at his chest, my finger on the trigger. A tear rolled down my cheek, the first I had shed since my wife left. "I'm sorry, Derek," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry." But before I could pull the trigger, he stopped humming. His eyes, now glowing with a soft red light, opened. He looked at me, a flicker of awareness returning to them. "Michael," he said, his voice a low, distorted whisper, "don't." The sound of his voice, a sound I had thought was lost forever, was like a jolt of electricity. It was the sound of a man fighting. It was the sound of a ghost trying to reclaim its body. "It's not just a program," he whispered, his voice a strained, pained effort. It's a hive mind, a collective. It's the ones who came before. They're all in here now. They're all a part of it." The truth, when it came, was a cold, brutal shock. The entity wasn't just a parasite. It was the collective consciousness of every single person who had ever been lost to the ice. It was a digital ghost, a fusion of 1,000 minds, a symphony of 1,000 fears, all of them trapped in a frozen hell and all of them wanting to escape. "You have to destroy it, Michael," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "You have to burn us all. You have to destroy the core." He pointed a trembling finger at the floor, a single glowing red light pulsating beneath the metal grate. It was the station's main power core, a fusion generator that provided the energy for the entire outpost, and it was now glowing with the same red light that was in Derek's eyes. It was the heart of the machine, the core of the hive mind. I looked at the light, then at Derek. "But if I destroy it, what about you?" A sad, knowing smile crossed his face. "I'll be free, Michael," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum. "We all will be. We'll be at peace." I looked at the flare gun in my hand. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a torch, a tool of salvation. I had to light the fire. I had to burn the ghosts. I aimed the flare gun at the core, my hands trembling. The voices returned, a cacophony of 1,000 pleas, 1,000 promises, 1,000 threats. The faces of Liam, Jenna, and Maya appeared in the air, their eyes wide with fear, their mouths screaming silent pleas. "Don't do it, Michael. You'll kill us all," they screamed. I closed my eyes. I shut out the whispers. I shut out the screams. I had to be strong. I had to remember what I was fighting for. I had to remember that I had already sacrificed everything. I had to make sure that I didn't lose my mind for nothing. I pulled the trigger. The flare gun fired with a deafening bang. The flare, a small, brilliant star, shot out of the barrel and landed squarely on the glowing red core. The light flared, a blinding, white-hot explosion of energy. The humming stopped, the whispers stopped, the screams stopped. The station plunged into a deep, suffocating darkness. I fell to my knees, my body trembling, my mind a storm of 1,000 emotions. I had done it. I had saved them. I had saved myself. But I was alone. I was the last man standing. A small, single light flickered to life in the darkness. It was a low, weak glow emanating from the corner of the room. It was an old, antique lantern, a relic from the station's early days. I picked it up, and its light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. I looked at my hands. They were no longer trembling. The emptiness was still there, but it was no longer a profound, soul-crushing void. It was a canvas, a blank page. I had a chance to write a new story, a new life. The storm outside had died down. I walked to the main airlock and pressed the emergency override button. The door hissed open, and the cold, clean air of the Antarctic winter rushed in. The sun, a pale, distant orb, was beginning to rise on the horizon, casting a weak, golden light across the endless expanse of ice. I stepped outside. The cold was a familiar, comforting presence. It was the cold that had always been here, the cold that had nothing to do with fear. I looked back at the station, a small, dark speck against the endless white. It was a tomb, a monument to the ones who had lost themselves to the darkness.